The Empire had conquered 17 star systems in less than a century. Their warships darkened the skies of countless worlds, and their soldiers marched through the ruins of civilizations that had once believed themselves powerful. Commander stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominion, watching the small blue planet grow larger on the viewing screen. Earth, the of a species that had barely discovered faster-than-light travel. This would be their 18th conquest, and he expected it to be their easiest. Intelligence reports had painted humans as fragile creatures. They lived short lives, rarely exceeding 100 years. Their bodies broke easily. They had no natural weapons like claws or venomous fangs. They could not survive in extreme temperatures. They needed constant supplies of oxygen, water, and food. They slept for nearly a third of their existence. By every measure they used to assess threats, humanity ranked at the absolute bottom. The High Council had laughed when requested only a minimal invasion force. Why waste resources on such a primitive species? A single battle fleet would be more than enough to bring Earth to its knees. The humans had no planetary shields, no orbital defense platforms, and their military technology was centuries behind engineering. It should have been simple. The first sign of trouble came when the landing parties touched down in a region the humans called Siberia. The temperature was brutal, far below what soldiers could comfortably endure, yet the humans who lived there seemed unbothered. They wore heavy clothing and continued their lives as if the cold was merely an inconvenience. When scouts attempted to establish a forward base, they found themselves under attack within hours, not from military forces, but from ordinary civilians. Farmers with hunting rifles, factory workers with improvised explosives, teachers who had learned overnight how to disable communication equipment. Dismissed these early setbacks as minor resistance. Every conquered species fought back initially. The key was overwhelming force. He ordered the main invasion to proceed, targeting major population centers across the planet. Thousands of soldiers descended upon cities in Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Americas. They expected surrender. They expected fear. They expected the humans to recognize superior power and submit as so many species had before. What they found instead was something entirely different. City called Manila, soldiers advanced through streets that seemed empty. They had scanned for human life signs and found none. The buildings appeared abandoned. Then, without warning, the ground itself seemed to swallow them. Humans emerged from sewers, basements, and hidden tunnels. They attacked with everything they had: kitchen knives, broken glass, bare hands. They had better weapons, better armor, and superior strength. But the humans would not stop. Soldiers who should have died from their wounds kept fighting. Civilians who had no training threw themselves at warriors, to buy time for others to escape or organize. In Moscow, they encountered a retired school principal named who had never held a weapon in his life. When soldiers came to his apartment building, he rigged the entire structure with explosives made from household chemicals. He evacuated every resident through a basement tunnel he had spent 2 days digging with his bare hands. Then he waited for them to enter before triggering the detonation. The blast killed 17 enemy soldiers. His last words, spoken into a radio, were simply, "Tell my students I was proud of them." Similar stories began pouring in from every occupied zone. In Cairo, a librarian named Fatima used her knowledge of ancient architectural designs to lead resistance fighters through forgotten passages beneath the city. A teenage programmer named hacked into communication networks and fed them false intelligence for 3 weeks before they discovered his location. In Lagos, a grandmother named organized a network of safe houses that helped thousands escape capture. None of these people were soldiers. None had been trained for war. They simply refused to accept defeat. Studied the battle reports with growing unease. The numbers made no sense. His forces had superior technology in every category. Their weapons were more powerful. Their armor was stronger. Their ships controlled the skies. Yet the casualties continued to mount. Soldiers were dying at rates that should have been impossible given the overwhelming advantage they possessed. Worse, the humans were adapting at a terrifying speed. In the first week of the invasion, captured weapons were useless to humans. They could not figure out how to activate them. By the second week, human engineers had reverse-engineered the basic firing mechanisms. By the third week, they were manufacturing crude copies using their own industrial equipment. By the fourth week, they had improved upon the original designs. A weapon that had taken scientists decades to develop was being mass-produced in human factories within a single planetary rotation cycle. They had never encountered anything like this. Other conquered species had possessed advanced technology or powerful militaries. Some had fought bravely, but none had shown this capacity for rapid innovation under pressure. The humans seemed to become more dangerous with every passing day. They learned from every defeat. They studied every captured piece of equipment. They shared information across their entire planet through networks that could not fully disrupt. Perhaps most disturbing was the humans' refusal to follow any predictable pattern of behavior. Military doctrine was built on understanding how species responded to conquest. Most species had hierarchies that, once captured or destroyed, caused the general population to lose the will to fight. Most species valued their own survival above all else and would eventually submit to preserve their lives. Most species experienced fear in ways that could be exploited. Humans every one of these assumptions. Their governments fell, but their people kept fighting. Leaders were captured, but new leaders emerged immediately to replace them. Even when facing certain death, individual humans would launch attacks that served no tactical purpose except to slow the advance by a few hours. They seemed to value things that made no logical sense. They would risk their lives to rescue a single child from a destroyed building. They would sacrifice themselves to protect strangers they had never met. They would refuse to surrender even when surrender was clearly the rational choice. Commander began to understand, far too late, that his intelligence reports had measured all the wrong things. Yes, humans were physically fragile. Yes, they lived short lives. Yes, they lacked natural weapons and could not survive without constant resource inputs. But these limitations had created something they had never considered. They had created a species that fought with a desperation born from knowing how precious and brief existence truly was. They lived for thousands of years. Death was a distant concept to them, something that happened to others. Humans carried the knowledge of their mortality with them every single day. They did not fight because they believed they would win. They fought because they understood that some things were worth dying for. Family, home, the future of their children, the memory of those who had come before. Abstract concepts that held no meaning for a species as long-lived and coldly logical, as the suddenly became weapons more powerful than any plasma cannon. 6 months into the invasion, requested reinforcements for the first time in his career. The High Council was shocked. A species with no advanced technology and no unified military had fought to a standstill. The reinforcements arrived and the fighting intensified, but the humans intensified as well. They turned every city into a fortress. They booby-trapped every road. They poisoned water supplies that fed camps. They launched guerrilla attacks that killed soldiers in their sleep. They never stopped. They never rested. They never surrendered. 1 year after the invasion began, stood in the ruins of what had once been a human city called Berlin. His forces controlled large portions of the planet. They had killed hundreds of millions of humans. They had destroyed countless cities. By any objective measure, they were winning. And yet, somehow, they were also losing. Every day brought new attacks. Every day brought new innovations from the human resistance. Every day brought new evidence that this species would never submit. The commander looked at a piece of graffiti painted on a wall near his command post. A human had written 4 words in their language. His translation device told him what they meant. "We will never quit." He thought about those words for a long time. He thought about the farmers who fought with hunting rifles, the teachers who built explosives, the grandmothers who organized resistance networks, the teenagers who hacked communication systems, the principal who sacrificed his life to kill 17 soldiers. None of them had been warriors. All of them had become warriors when their world demanded it. They had conquered 17 star systems because those systems had contained species that could be broken, species that valued survival, species that would accept domination in exchange for peace. Humanity was different. Humanity would rather be destroyed entirely than live under the rule of another. And in that terrible willingness to sacrifice everything, they had found a weapon that no amount of technology could defeat. Return to the Eternal Dominion and sent a message to the High Council. He recommended immediate withdrawal from Earth. His reasoning was simple. They could eventually win this war. They had the resources and the military power to destroy every human on the planet, but the cost would be catastrophic. By his calculations, conquering Earth completely would require the deaths of more soldiers than they had lost in all 17 previous conquests combined. And even then, the last human alive would still be fighting. The High Council debated for weeks before accepting his recommendation. The fleet departed Earth, leaving behind a planet by war but unbroken. Humanity had survived. They had paid an enormous price in lives and suffering, but they had taught the galaxy a lesson that would never be forgotten. Other species would hear the story. Other species would learn what had happened when the great empire had come to Earth expecting easy conquest. They never knew what humans were capable of. They saw only the fragile bodies and short. They saw only the lack of natural weapons and the need for constant resources. They measured everything that could be measured and concluded that humanity posed no threat. What they failed to understand was that human strength had never come from their bodies. It came from their hearts. It came from their minds. It came from their absolute refusal to accept defeat under any circumstances. By the time they understood this truth, their invasion had already failed. The humans had won not because they were stronger, but because they simply would not stop. And across the galaxy, species that had lived under rule began to whisper a new hope. If humanity could resist, perhaps they could too. Perhaps the empire that had seemed invincible was not as powerful as everyone believed. Perhaps the small blue planet called Earth had changed everything. They had come to conquer a world. They had accidentally awakened something far more dangerous. They had given the galaxy a symbol of resistance that would burn in the hearts of oppressed peoples for generations to come. They never knew what humans were capable of until it was too late. And by then, it was far too late to do anything except retreat and remember the lesson they had learned on that fragile, beautiful, unconquerable world.